The way we see things. In kindergarten, I used to love playing this puzzle game where you have to find Wally in a crowd. I'd be really bad at it compared to my classmates, and of course he'd be somewhere really obvious, like right in the middle. I'd ask my teacher how I could get better at finding Wally, and she would just say, keep doing the puzzles. Eventually you'll get better at it. Fast forward to now, I'm in university, and again I'm wondering how we could be better at finding things, only this time it's finding aggressive brain cancers in MRI images. To my surprise, the current approach to getting better at spotting brain cancers is the same approach my kindergarten teacher told me to find Wally. Just keep doing the puzzle books and eventually you'll get better at it. There are currently no robust methods for training people to become better at spotting things. But I think we could teach ourselves to be better at perception by understanding the way we see things. And to gain that understanding, we need to be able to model the visual gaze. But we can't just arbitrarily use random data because we actually don't look at things totally randomly. We tend to look at the middle of things framed by the edges of an image. We generally hate to look at one spot for an extended period, and we don't like looking at the same spot over and over again. And our ability to see things at the edges of our vision is pretty poor. So how can we represent all these gaze behaviors with a framework? Tracking the way a person might look for Wally over just a few seconds would create an incredibly complex array of data. My research suggests the answer is in an exciting combination of fractal geometry and bioinformatics. And here's how. First, let's imagine looking at a painting for a moment, and let's pretend that as your eyes look over a painting, an imaginary line is drawn from point to point as you take in the artwork. Just after a few seconds, the painting would have a lot of these imaginary lines over it. So here you can see how Bob and Jill are looking at Starry Night. But the maps of each person's visual gaze pattern don't include a crucial dimension: time. If we ignore time when we compare gaze patterns, we won't see that Bob spent 4 seconds looking at a particular detail that Jill only checked out for a second. If this was an MRI scan and Bob was a beginning radiologist who happens to spend a lot of time looking at noses in brain scans, we might be able to say, hey Bob, be more like Jill and spend less time looking at noses when you check out your brain scans. So now that we know how important both time and those invisible gaze lines are when we compare visual patterns, how do we graph and compare them? My research is introducing a novel way to express all that data using space. But not outer space, I'm talking about fractal space. Specifically, a type of space-filling curve developed by German mathematician David Hilbert in the late 19th century. This approach to geometry has allowed me to combine the visual gaze maps we saw earlier with additional time information into a simple flat list of numbers. With this list of numbers representing my new visual gaze model, I wanted to see if I could predict what someone was looking at without any other inputs. In my experiment, we did just that. I had 53 people look at 2 different paintings and try to predict which one they were looking at. The challenge was that there was no task, no order, and no structure. They were just simply asked to look at each painting. Using a method I developed based on a bioinformatics algorithm used in protein science, I was able to match participants with the paintings they were looking at. This included a scoring method I developed using a curve comparison technique developed by French mathematician Maurice Fréchet. I tailored his method to fit my visual gaze framework using Hilbert curves, returning a similarity score based on their comparison. After creating a heat map of all 53 participants, showing the score between each one of them, a pattern emerged that I was onto something. The darker areas show high match scores, and this lined up with what each participant was looking at. I was able to match participants with the paintings they were looking at more effectively than the leading matching methods used in current literature, as shown here with ScanMatch on the right and my method called SoftMatch on the left. What does putting people into groups tell us about perception? Well, in this experiment, we looked at how 2 people can have their perception compared using 2 paintings. But we could just have easily used one image to see how 2 people view it similarly. This was done by Corrett and others in 2019 to assist in the diagnosis of autism in children. And in future work, we can cluster high-performing radiologists with MRI scans to see how they differ from novices in the way they look for cancers. But most of all, my research will provide an opportunity for others to use the model I've created as a framework for further behavioral research, so we could be closer to understanding the way we see things.